I'm Clay Koenig, superintendent. I think this is the start of my 18th or 19th year at River Ridge. Started out down in the shop as the shop teacher and left for 1 year, wanted to get back in the worst way, became principal, believed in the district, believed in the kids, so I was asked to consider the superintendency, and I accepted that. And that's who I am, been around here for quite some time. And look me up, call me if you have any other questions. That's me. And this is Carol Worth from Wisconsin Public Finance Professionals. I do believe that when we start talking about the referendums of the past, I think that she's been involved in every single one of them that we've had. So there's no better person to explain some of those items than Carol. Anything for yourself?
Thank you. Yes, I've been working with the district. Our firm is what's called a municipal advisor to the school district, which would be very similar to an individual working with a financial advisor. So I only work with schools, cities, towns, counties, so on. So I have been working with River Ridge School District for at least 17 years. So I go back a ways with your prior referendums. So I'm going to get started here, and the first slide, as everyone knows, the district held a referendum in April of this year, and that referendum did not pass. So this is the district's second opportunity to have a question on the ballot. And the first slide is basically addressing what is different between the April and the November referendum. And as you can see, in April, that's what was called a recurring referendum, which means it had 4 different dollar amounts, but the last dollar amount was recurring. It means it stayed ongoing. With the November referendum, this is what's called a non-recurring referendum. It's out for a specific number of years, and that's 3 years, and then it expires. It completely drops off. The only way it could continue is if it comes back to a vote at another referendum after 3 years. So that's a major difference between them. Also with the November referendum, it is $1 amount, the same dollar amount for those 3 years. Of course, there's a difference in the tax rate. At the time we went to referendum in April, we had values of 2023, equalized values, and we'll get into more explanation about that later in the presentation. So when you took the dollar amounts and you divided it into the value, you came up with a tax rate. So the tax rate that would have been for this year at that time was $3.56 per thousand. The tax rate for the November referendum, and that is based on 24 values, which is a totally different number, is $2.60 per thousand. The purposes are exactly the same, no difference. The purposes is to fund operating costs, to just maintain the instructional programs, staffing, technology, and facilities management. There's nothing new that's being added. It's to maintain what the district has to offer. So we're going to go back a little further into some of the history of operational referendums that have passed in River Ridge. This goes back to 2008, when the district held a 4-year non-recurring referendum. So that means those were the dollar amounts, 300, 400, 440, and 440, and then it expired. It dropped off. Okay? Those dollars provided revenue for operating costs. When that 11-12 one expired, the district went back to referendum and continued for 2 more years. Again, non-recurring, 2 years expired, 440 and 515. When that one expired, the district went back to referendum in the year 2014. This was what's called a combination question. It had 2 different structures. One was non-recurring, which was the $150,000 for 5 years, and then it drops off. It also, in that same question, had a 350,000 recurring, which means it started in 1450 and it stayed in the revenue limit ongoing. Okay, so the 350 is still in the base of the revenue limit today. The 150 ended in 1819 and came out of tax bills. Okay, so that's basically your difference between something that is non-recurring, it does stop, comes out of tax bills because it expires. And then you have to come back to referendum in order to ask for whatever the dollar amount is going forward. Okay, so that's what the November referendum is, non-recurring, 3 years, okay, $1 amount. Okay.
Sorry, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. Write down your questions, we'll go through this. If you have questions, write them on the sheet, we'll come back and we'll answer them. So, thank you.
Okay, now, we just got done talking about operational referendums here at the district. There's another type of referendum, there's two types. One is for operating expenses, and the other type of referendum is called a facilities referendum, where the question on the ballot is different. You're asking for permission to borrow money for a certain purpose. So there were 3 referendums, one of them again in 2008. So you see back in 2008 we had an operational, at the same time there was a facilities referendum, and that was for $595,000, and the purpose of that was to refinance some existing debt. And that debt that we were refinancing was used to pay off pension liability, and that created an annual debt payment, a debt payment of principal and interest of around $67,000 a year. That has been paid off in 2022. The next one was in 2016. It was for $9.5 million. This was to combine the district facilities to create the pre-K-12 campus here at Patch Grove site. That resulted in annual payments, principal and interest, of about $700,000 a year, and that continues. That's in our tax bill every year and stays there until 2037. When that ends, the taxes will, by $700,000, will drop off. The district cannot continue to tax for that once the debt has been fully repaid. The last one was in 2020, $2.3 million, construct outdoor educational facilities including athletic fields. The annual debt service payment, principal and interest, about $140,000. That's currently in the tax bills. That stays there through 2039. After that, that amount drops off. Okay, so that is the way school finance works, is that the levy for the debt payment can only be levied for and in your tax bill as long as the debt is outstanding. Once it's paid off, it can't switch over and start to be used for operations. It has to expire.
Jason, you want to take the clicker? I just hit the enter button on the computer.
All right, that brings us to the ballot language for this November referendum. So this is what you will see. It is posed as a question, and it'll have yes and no for you to vote. So it says, shall the River Ridge School District, Grant County, Wisconsin, be authorized, and that's the key word. You're giving authority, you're giving permission. You're giving permission to the school board to exceed the revenue limit. And we'll talk about that, what that revenue limit is. Specified in this statute, 12191. And the reason it says that is because the revenue limit is a law. So that's why it's referenced that way. And then it says, well, how much are you going to exceed it by? And the answer is by $1,100,000 per year for 3 years. And it has to identify what those 3 years are. So it says beginning with the 24-25 school year, which is right now, the year we are in. And ending with the 26-27 school year. So that is 3 years. And it says for non-recurring purposes. Now, you say, what's a non-recurring purpose? Again, the word non-recurring means it expires. It will not continue beyond that. The purposes consisting of operational costs. So what are operational costs, right? And it's the operational cost to maintain, just keep what we have. Instructional programs, staffing, technology, and facilities management. Okay, so that's the question that you will see. It's not user-friendly. It is written by attorneys according to the Wisconsin statutes. It's very specific as to how that question has to be drafted. Okay, so the district and myself have no ability to have any input on that. So that's what you're seeing. So the explanation, the question asks voter permission to levy taxes. That's what exceeding the revenue limit means. They're asking for permission to levy taxes, and that's in the amount of $1,000,001. And that would be to increase school district revenues, right? That gives that district more revenues. And it's doing that by exceeding this revenue limit that we're going to talk about. And it's used to pay operating expenses for 3 years. So that's the explanation of everything that's going on up in that question. Okay? And again, non-recurring means the November 24th referendum authority expires after 3 years. It drops off. Anyway, if the district were to continue that amount or any other amount, we would be going through a referendum. Okay, now we're going to have a couple of slides that goes into probably more than you ever wanted to know about the revenue limit. But I get excited about this stuff, so. Okay, so first thing, the revenue limit is a state law. So it started back in 1993, still there. All school districts are affected by the same law. And the trick is, it's subject to legislative changes with each state budget process. Okay? The state goes through its own budget process every 2 years. Every 2 years, the legislators say, well, we might make a change to that revenue limit. So when you talk about school districts trying to project their financial picture, it's like, well, good luck with that, right? It's going to be, who's going to make up the legislature? What are they going to do when they are making their decisions? How is that going to change what we currently are doing? And we're kind of in that position right now. We're in the second year right now of the state's biennial budget. Next year, we're going to be starting a brand new budget. So everything that we're doing now and thinking about is kind of up for grabs. We don't know. We can't even predict what that's going to be. Now, this limit, the reason it's called the revenue limit is because it truly is the limit that limits how much operating revenue, how much money the school district gets from two sources, tax levy and state aid, which are the two largest sources of revenue for a school district. There are some other sources. You have some grants, some state aid, some other types of state aid, some federal grants, and so on. But these are the two primary sources of revenue that school districts have, every school district. Okay? And of course, a voter approval is required to exceed it. All right, the revenue limit itself. It's a DPI worksheet. It's a spreadsheet. Okay, if you were here for the annual meeting, you've seen it was part of the packet, and it really comes out looking like 4 pages like this, printed, and it has one page where the district inputs, the only information the district inputs really is its enrollment number when it takes the 3rd Friday of September count. Because all the rest of the information, DPI has it pre-populated. So those numbers are already in there. And those numbers are in there based on the law and looking back to the district's prior revenue limit sheets. So one side is all just inputting one number, and once that number is input for the enrollment, it flows through, goes on to the next page, and it arrives at what is your limit. And that is what I always refer to as line 11. Line 11 is, that's how much money you're going to have. Okay? We know that after we put in the third Friday enrollment number. Okay? The next thing that happens is line 12. Line 12, we don't have the final number until October 15th, which comes from the state. The state says, okay, based on the state aid formula, this is how much aid you're going to get. That goes on line 12. Line 11, subtract line 12, gives you line 13. Line 13, lucky line 13, is tax levy. That's the amount of tax levy for your operations. Okay? So, many times people think of the state aid part of it as, oh, we're getting more state aid, that means the district's getting more money. No. How much revenue the district gets stops right there at line 11. Line 12, if you get more state aid, the property tax number is lower. If you get less state aid, the property tax number is higher, so your taxes could go up. And the district could actually be getting less revenue. But it's the state sharing in the district's expenses, right? And that pot of money that is set aside by the state legislators, they determine what that pot of money is. That's another thing that happens with every state budget cycle. They make that determination. So we have no way of predicting, are we going to get the same level of aid from year to year versus what happens when we have a new state budget? Okay? So this is a very important thing to remember in the whole process, because you could see tax bills go up and you go, wow, that district must be getting a lot of money this year, my taxes are going up. No, the aid is driving if your taxes are going up. Okay? So your revenue limit on line 11, it stops right there. So that's what we're here tonight talking about, is how to increase line 11. Okay? All right. And now
Oh, did I do it too soon?
no, that's fine.
Okay.
No, I was just going to say, this is the final slide on the revenue limit in terms of explanation. As I said, it's a formula that's tied to enrollment. So, remember I was talking about that you start with your third Friday of September count? Well, that count is driven by what's called your resident student enrollment. Okay, so that affects it. And also, as I talked about, legislative changes to the formula will affect line 11. So, third Friday of September, we take that full-time equivalent count. The revenue limit formula takes a 3-year average of those counts. So this is a chart that shows you what that 3-year average is, because the 3-year average number is what flows through the formula. Okay? So that just gives you a visual of what's happening. It is also driven to say if you have decline or increase in enrollment count, will also equate to a decline or increase in the revenue limit. Okay, so it's a formula tied to enrollment. Okay, so those are the 3 things. It's a law, right? It's a DPI worksheet. It's just a spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet. And it's a formula tied to enrollment. Okay, so it's a little background for you on what we're talking about. Okay. All right, so now with this, we're going to go into enrollment, because we talked about this as being your resident student enrollment. Okay, so on the next page, people will say, well, what's your enrollment? Well, that's a good question, because we can give you about 4 different answers for that one. okay? You have categories that start with your resident enrollment, and that means students living in the River Ridge School District. And so those students count in that revenue limit calculation, okay? So it's all students living in your district. Now you also have what's called open enrollment out. You may have some of the students living in your district that are actually attending a district somewhere else. So that's called open enroll out. They're your resident students, they're in your count, but they are going somewhere else. In that scenario, River Ridge, because they are counted in your revenue limit, ends up having to pay tuition to those school districts for those students. Now, the same is true in reverse. You have what's called open enrollment in, which means you have students in other school districts that are coming to River Ridge. So that means that they are open enrolling into your district, and their school districts where they reside are paying tuition to River Ridge. Okay, so that's the way it's handled. But when it comes to that revenue limit count, it's your resident enrollment figure that is what is going in the formula. Okay, so all of that produces what's called the students in the seats. How many students are you actually educating? So you start with your resident enrollment, but then you have to take out the ones that are open enrolled out, and then you have to put back in the open enrolled in. That all produces your students in seats. Okay? Clear as mud, right? But that's why it's difficult when somebody will say, well, what's your enrollment? It's like, oh boy. Okay, we've got lots of numbers for you, but this is an explanation. The reason we're giving you this explanation is because you are being affected by your resident enrollment for the revenue limit we are talking about. But we also want to give you information about the actual enrollment picture here. Okay, so the next page is going to give you the detail, a 6-year historical.
So Carol pretty much nailed the bottom, but one of the things that I really like to talk about on this slide is the open enrolled out versus the open enrolled in, because it always seems to be a conversation, a topic, because people will look at our numbers this year and say, oh gosh, you have 72 students that are open enrolled out. Yeah, that's not a good thing, but when you look at this, most 90% of those students that are open enrolled out have never set foot in our building. Just for an example, this year, we had a family move in that had 3 kids. They moved in from a neighboring district to our district. They're like, no, my kids are going to continue because they're in high school and one's in middle school. We're going to continue going to our home district. So although they never left a district, they switched their address and came to us. We've never had those kids, and they continue going on. So that is a ding against us when you look at open enrolled out. And if you look at open enrolled in, I feel as if we do a pretty good job with the open enrolled in, but I do know that a lot of times people get stuck on the open enrolled out, and for most of the time they're not leaving our district because they are dissatisfied with the services that we're providing. We never had a chance to actually get them into the door, whether that started in 4K, whether they went with mom and dad to Lancaster, Fenimore, or Prairie for daycare. They became comfortable, they got friends, or whether or not they moved into our district and decided to stay with their home district. There is some that will open and roll out, but certainly not very many that we've had here in our district that will open and roll out. It does happen, just not very often.
All right, now, back to the revenue limit discussion. These are all historical numbers, okay? There's no projections, no estimates going on here. These are all historical numbers. Now, this is showing you what is that line 11 that we talked about on slide 7. This is the actual number that you will see if you went back and pulled all those spreadsheets. This is the number. So 9 years worth of numbers, and that shows you in 16-17 our number was 6,208,000. The next year it allowed us to go up to 6,221,000. Not a very big increase, right? The following year it actually went down to 6,188,000. So that is possible for the revenue limit to actually go backwards. It doesn't mean it's a given that every year the district's going to have more revenue. It actually goes backwards at times, right? And then the next year we went up to 6,267,000, a little bit more of a jump. And then into the 6,368,000, then we went back down a little bit to 6,331,000. And then of course we went up again, a little bit more up, and then up this year. So a lot of volatility backwards and forwards. I took the difference in each of the years and I averaged it out over 9 years, and it comes out to a difference of about $45,000 a year average increase over 9 years. So you can imagine 9 years ago what it costs to operate the district and what it costs now, and you can see that the revenue limit allowed about on average about $45,000 a year increase during that time. Now, I also said that that revenue limit is subject to legislative changes, right? So we know it's subject to enrollment, which we just talked about, but it's also subject to legislative changes. So one of the things that spreadsheet has, again, all pre-populated, the district has no control over it, is the legislature will say, well, for these next 2 years, we're going to allow you to have what's called a per pupil adjustment. And that adjustment is usually in so many dollars per student. Well, here's an example of what those numbers were. In 16-17, 0. The next 2 years, 0. The following 2 years was $175 a student and $179 a student. The following 2 years, and you can kind of see the pattern of the state budget, right? The following 2 years, back to 0. And now, last year and this year, the number is $325. Okay? So that's the kind of volatility that exists for school districts. And those numbers apply to every school district in the state. It's plugged into everybody gets the same numbers in their calculation. This is not tied to enrollment. This is simply the legislature saying, this is how your revenue limit's going to look this year. So that's the reason why some years it goes backwards and some years it goes up and some years, so that's the kind of volatility that we're dealing with. All right, we can move on. Now we talked about state aid, right? And the state shares in the all school districts' expenses. Well, I shouldn't say all school districts. There are some school districts that don't get any state aid, believe it or not. But for now, that's at line 12 on that spreadsheet. So the state aid formula was also established in 1993, the same time as the revenue limit was. So again, that's subject to legislative changes during the state's biennial budget process. And that's that, what I call that pot of money that's available to be distributed to all school districts. They come up with the number. It provides financial assistance, which is property tax release. It doesn't determine how much money the school district gets to operate on. It determines, line 11 does that. Line 12 is saying, okay, this is how much the state's going to share in those revenues. So, less aid means more levy, because you're going to take line 11 and subtract the aid. you get the levy on line 13. So if you have more aid, you have less tax levy. So this school year, right now, the budget this year is receiving $189,000 less aid than it did last year. So you know what that means? More tax levy. Okay? So that is driven by what school districts spend in the prior year. Okay? All school districts have to report to the state what their budgets were last year. The state puts all of that information into the formula. The other thing that drives more or less aid is if your property values are increasing, because the formula is basically prepared to say if you have more valuation, you need less aid. So if the more your property values go up, the more likely you're going to have less aid. Okay? So those are the drivers to the aid formula. Okay? So I know the numbers are hard to see, but we start with a couple years at $3,000,005 level. We go up to $3,000,009, $4,000,002 for a couple of years, $4,000,003. In 22-23, we're up to $4,672,000. That was our highest year. And the next year we went down, $4,651,000, and now this year $4,462,000. So these last 2 years, this 22-23 was our highest year, and we've gone down in each of those 2 years. So again, the worst combination in the aid formula is rising values and declining enrollment, because the calculation they use is how much value is behind each student. Okay, so that's what the drivers are for determining that, as well as the distribution of the pot of money from the state. Okay. All right, we can move on. Speaking of rising property value, okay, here is your historical, what's called equalized values. Okay, we're going to use the word equalized, which also means fair market value. They're one and the same. They are determined, those values are determined by the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. They are based on two things: any new construction, and the rest is what they call economic changes, which is inflation. They claim that they take actual examples of sales of property occurring in each municipality, and that's how they come up with the equalized value. You also are more familiar with the word assessed value. Assessed value is determined by a local assessor for each municipality. And yes, they are doing that assessment based under the guidance of the Department of Revenue. Okay? But when we're talking a school district, a county, a vocational district, those three entities all have multiple cities, villages, and towns within their borders. So they can't work with assessed values. So therefore, the state came up with equalized values. So that's the reason why school districts will always put out information on tax rates based on the math associated with an equalized value. The district wouldn't even know what an assessed value is. They'd have no clue. Only number the school district knows is this equalized value. So it's important that when we are talking about things here, that we are going to be working with the right number, and we'll get into that later on in the presentation as well. Now, this goes back, there's 9 years up here. Actually, this was 218 million back in 16-17. It is now 421.8 million. 93% increase in property values over that period of time. 93%. Over just the last 5 years is 74. Okay? And from last year to this year, it's a little over 20%. Now, we are always, in these earlier years, you can see numbers are 218, 225, 234, okay? That was kind of normal. You'd see 2%, 3%, maybe at 4% once in a while, okay? That was kind of normal. But now you're going double digits. And now you're into the 20s. So obviously, it's economic change, as they call it, okay? You know it's inflationary value. It's your same property, just with a bigger number on it. Okay? So we're going to get into some of the numbers and what that means, but in the past, when you would see a tax levy that the school district would come up with and would divide that levy into the equalized value, you would get a tax rate. The tax rates were a little bit up and down, a little fluctuation, right? But for the most part, reasonably close. Well, now you're seeing a whole different picture about tax rates driven by what's going on here. Okay? And we're going to talk about what that means in terms of taxes. Okay? So, here we go. Just an exercise. And again, the exercise is dealing with the difference between last year and this year. Okay? So, rising property values change the tax rate, not necessarily the tax impact. And the tax impact is the dollars that it ends up costing you. The dollar amount of taxes that the school district levies is what changes the tax impact. So you should be focused on what is the amount of the levy, because, well, here's the exercise, okay? Naturally, you would think, oh my gosh, with a 20% increase from last year, does that mean my taxes are going up 20%? And the answer is no. Here is evaluation numbers between last year and this year, and you see that 20%. Here is the district's tax levy last year and this year, and the number I'm using does not have the 24 referendum in there because that would be skewing the result. I have to work with, that hasn't been voted in. So the difference between the two levy numbers is 11.3%. Okay? So I said, well, let's just, and we're going to work with 100,000 for easy math. Let's just say that somebody's property was valued at 100,000. Okay? If it was valued at 100,000 last year when you got your December 23 tax bill, and it's going to go up 20%, or 20.14%, if it goes up like that, you would see your new number at 120,140. That would be on the December 24 tax bill. So, okay? So that's saying, same property, if it was worth 100,000 last year and it goes up 20.14%, it's going to be 120,140 on your tax bill. So last year, the school district's tax rate, we put this in a rate format of, and this would really be like $7.53 per thousand, so I put it in the format that you can multiply that at 100,000. And this year's tax rate is $698, and I multiply the tax rate times the property value in each case. Here you would get $753. Here you would get $838. The difference between that is 11.3% increase. The same as the amount of taxes that were levied. So again, when you're looking at, is my taxes going to go up or down? you look to what is the district levy. Because if your property value is rising due to inflation, the tax rate is going down, because that's just math. That's just taking the value into the levy into the value to produce the mill rate. So this divided into that gives you this number. So this number drops. It looks like it's lower, right? Somebody say, oh, geez, is my tax is going down? No, because you know why? This number went up. So you apply the lower rate to a higher value in order to find out what is the effect on my tax bill. What am I going to be paying? And the answer comes out to be the same percentage as the district's levy going up by that percentage. That's your answer. Okay, so you're not going to go up 20%. You would go up 11.3%. Okay. All right. All right. So now, kind of going back to the topic of the levy, line 13 on that revenue limit spreadsheet is the tax levy for operations, because that's the one that needs voter approval. Line 11 needs voter approval, but we get to line 13 by subtracting the state aid. But what can be added to that line 13 is if there was a referendum approved for facilities, which you have. You have 2 outstanding right now, right, that we went through at the beginning of the presentation. So we add to line 13 the answer that we got on line 13, we add the referendum approved debt, right, which is also, the levy is less the state aid number. So we have a chart here of what the levies were going back to 16-17. Now, it's interesting to watch. One thing I'm going to point out is back on a couple slides, we had, when we were looking at state aid, we said that the 22-23 year was the highest state aid year. It also happens to be the lowest tax levy year out of all of these numbers. Okay, so there's the relationship. When you look at other ones, like here's a number that goes from 2.77 up to 3,089,000. This is the first year of the 2016 referendum debt payment. That's what drove this one up. Okay. You have another one happening over here. That's the 2020 referendum, the first year that affects, so it went from 2,007,000 to 2,885,000. So that's what you're seeing happening here. Okay? So those are the things that are driving the ups and downs. So now you have, in these numbers, right, continuing on here, you have the 2 referendums still in your tax bill. The 2008 one was paid off here. That was the last year, so that's some of the reason why this dropped. And the fact that you had the highest state aid. Okay? So, all right, so you've got all these levy numbers, right? And they're all over the place. They look all up and down. So now let's look at the next page. Look at your tax rate. If you didn't see that other slide, and you just looked at this, you'd go, oh, okay. You know, that looks kind of normal, right? I mean, but you see what's driving this. This is taking that levy number that we just seen, divided into that equalized value number, which was climbing. So as that number was climbing, this goes down. Doesn't mean taxes went down. It means that the amount, the rate, times your property value each of those years is what determined how much taxes you paid. That's what's key. And if you had, between these years, you know, taxes and property values going up 93%, that's why you were going from the $12 and $13 down to $7. not because you paid less taxes necessarily during that time, it's just the fact that your valuation went up. So that's just a math exercise. Okay, so the 23 tax bill had this $7.53 in there. And we're going to come back to that. I'm going to show you how to go through if you want to pull your tax bill from last year and do an exercise. I'll show you how we're going to use that. Okay? So this just goes up to last year because I wanted to give you historical information. Okay? So now we can go to the next slide that talks about this year. So this would be the levy included in your December 24 tax bills coming out. And it's broken down between this referendum being approved or not approved. So you can see both numbers. And it's broken down by the categories, right? The operations number, which is really that line 13 on that spreadsheet, which is the same for both. The referendum approved debt for both of the referendums that are still in effect, same number. And then, of course, the referendum number for November being under the approved column. So then you add them up to come up with the total amount levied under both options. So if I take those levy amounts and divide it into the 24 equalized value, I get a tax rate. So the tax rate without the referendum is $6.98 per thousand. If I add the referendum, it's $9.58 per thousand. So when you subtract the two, there's a difference of $2.60. So you may have seen some information about the referendum impact at $2.60. That's how the math is figured. It's just taking the levy, dividing it into the valuation, and it produces the rate. Okay?
So real quick on that slide, this 958, that's the tax impact in the first year.
Yes.
Can you talk, is there any slides that talk
Yeah.
about it in the second? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And this would strictly be for the 24-25 budget. Yeah, that would strictly be this year. It is going to be, we're going to be talking about the tax rate, which we already talked about being $2.60, but we're going to talk about that going forward because that's going to change in the second year, and that's all driven by that state aid formula. So we'll talk about that in here as well. Okay? All right? We can move on. There you go.
Okay, so obviously the April 24 referendum did not pass, and we did have to make decisions about how we were going to try to balance the budget heading into this year. And what you see up here are some of the things that we addressed with some of the dollar figures that were attached to those that were affected. The after-hours program doesn't exist any longer. The high schools, we eliminated a high school science position, a combination of library staffing, 4K staffing, and tech ed staffing, an impact of about 101,000. Intra and extracurricular budget along with general supplies about 150,000. Technology budget about 60,000. Not giving any staff increases or cost of living increases, about 160,000. We were unable to contribute to the building and maintenance fund. And there was one other point that I really wanted to make in there, but I can't remember what it was. So those are the things that were all affected by the referendum not passing. I know that people say, well, we didn't know that, but we didn't know during April what exactly cuts were going to be made at that time. And it took some time to weed through it with the board to figure out where we would go ahead and make some cuts. And those were the areas that were ultimately decided on. Now this is kind of a summary. We will go into further depth on these. But if the November 24 referendum would pass, it would allow us to restore, obviously, and combat the inflationary impact that we have on our operating costs, cost of living increases. Insurance this year, we were able to control some of our insurance costs this year as a district because we were able to assume some extra risk to not see those costs go up. I do know that Warco Transportation worked with the board pretty diligently about if any increases, maybe not at all. Those type things are not going to be sustainable. Obviously, utilities, food service, and special education keeps going up. Staffing's tough. It has been tough. You can ask any district. We don't get applicants for teaching positions. Not many districts do like they used to. So obviously that's where retention and recruitment becomes important. Our 4K program all day, every day, it's been awesome to have. Our district-wide course offerings are pretty decent for a district that is rural. Student options, we'll talk more about that. We'll talk about the things that we do intra and extracurricularly for our students. We'll talk about some of our technology platforms and what we use and how we use technology. We'll talk about the maintenance fund, the capital improvement fund, how that can impact us moving forward. And obviously it will allow us to maintain a fiscally responsible budget for some of the things that Carol had said earlier, that our budget is a biennial budget away from not knowing and being really uncertain with what those funds could be in the next biennial budget. So to have a good fiscal budget is putting ourselves in a pretty decent position to be successful and weather some storms. If this referendum were to pass, and it passes for 3 years, and it fails again, obviously if we had absolutely no fund balance, it would be pretty interesting. But to have that fund balance and be able to maintain that fund balance gives us a little of cushion to avoid some really difficult decisions if we absolutely need it.
So one of the things that Clay mentioned was the rising operational costs, and this deals with the inflationary impact. I think that's something that every person can relate to. You know what it means to yourself, to your own household. School district has the exact same scenario. Okay, they're experiencing that same thing when it comes to, and this is a listing of an example of operating costs. Their utilities, just like we have utilities, their transportation costs and office supplies, student supplies, curriculum costs, are very expensive for curriculum costs. Equipment has replacement cycles, custodial supplies, facility maintenance, insurance costs, as well as salaries and benefits. So over a period of years, and you've seen, again, when we were talking about that line 11 on that revenue limit, right, that average over all those years was about $45,000 a year, right? You can imagine trying to operate the district with that type of an increase, and especially the type of inflationary costs we've all experienced over the last couple of years. So the district is the same way, okay? So that's what we're talking about, the inflationary impact on the district.
So just before we jump into some of these programs that were affected by the cut, I want to make sure that everybody understands that just because they're up here and just because we're talking about them, doesn't mean if the referendum would pass that they're absolutely positively guaranteed to come back. Because we don't know how far that 1.1 million will go for absolute certainty. So the after hours program, though, it did service up to 40 students that attended the program daily. It did provide students with academic success. Homework help reduces the battles at home. Social skills definitely helps there. And it allows the students to stay in our building, which I think the kids actually don't mind. They kind of like being here, which is a good thing. But just this morning, Mr. Winkers and I were in a middle school staff meeting. They were just saying, hey, when are you going to get out the information about parents possibly paying to bring their kids to after hours? I said, we sent that out. We heard back from 2 families. So I'm like, we're not doing it based upon those results. But the teachers all said it would be awesome if that was still there because the results that it did have were pretty good.
Mr. King, do you have a dollar amount on that after hours program?
It was on the slide before.
On the slide before?
Yep. So 4-year-old kindergarten, we did change to all-day, everyday 4-year-old kindergarten about 6 years ago, somewhere in there. It's been awesome. It definitely allows our 4K students to get into a routine. It allows them to maybe learn a little bit more as they start progressing through our elementary school. I will say that this year, we started with 24 4K students in that classroom. 24 little ones in 4K. And a lot of those needs of those students, they're not shrinking. So that's a really interesting classroom. If we didn't have to cut that 4K position, it would still be there. It'd be more manageable, it'd be better for the kids. Right now that classroom is very, very busy. So just kind of so you know how that impacted us last year, that this year's 4K classroom started with 24. I believe they're down to 23 still, Mr. Hanna?
Add another one Monday.
Yeah, back to 24. So anyway, that's the importance of the 4-year-old program. A lot of districts still, and I shouldn't say a lot, there's still a few districts that don't offer an all-day, everyday 4K program. Mostly every district's going to it. If we didn't have it, I would question whether or not some of our parents would pull their 4K students to go to Fenimore, Lancaster, Prairie, the districts that have all-day, everyday 4K for childcare purposes, because that seems to be an issue in this district, as well as finding daycares or childcares that have openings. The ones that we have are good, but they seem like they're full. Obviously, maintaining class sizes, anything over 24, really at any level, is too big. That's kind of the driving marker. And I do know that as we roll into the high school this year, we have some numbers that are real close to already going over 24 without having the science, eliminating that science position. We're pushing that number at 24. Some of our non-core classes, such as PE, they do have more than 24 in it. But all of those core classes we like to keep small. English 9s, English 10s, that all the students are required to take right now. They're pushing that. They're not over that. We want to make sure that we can stay underneath that level for a couple different purposes. First purpose is, quite frankly, our rooms aren't big enough to handle a lot more than 24 students, especially down the high school hallway. You get 24 full, grown high schoolers in that room, it becomes pretty tight for them to operate around. So to keep it below 24 definitely increases the academic value, and it allows the teachers to do a much better job to make sure they're reaching the students. Course offerings. Used to do a lot of this when I was principal, as far as trying to figure out what we're doing with high school students who have maybe a different interest, or they have a different, not necessarily career path, but we have students who have Chinese ancestries, and they're like, hey, we want to take Chinese as a language. We don't offer it as a district. We can't afford to hire a Chinese teacher, but one of the things that we can do is we can say, you want to learn a foreign language and you want to challenge yourself, we're going to say yes to that. There's some things that we don't have any say over as a district with some of the Start College Nows and the alternative open enrollments. Those are controlled with state statute, but we do allow a lot of our kids. We've had kids that take all of our math courses. They max out in the math courses. They're like, we want to take a college level math course. We're not here to hold the kids back. We're here to give them the opportunities that we can. We do offer AP classes at the high school level. We have transcripted credits at the high school. Going all the way down to the elementary, our specials rotations are awesome. They get art, they get music, they get Phi-Ed, then they get to go to the library still. So I'm pretty happy with the opportunities that our students have. I want to make sure that they're able and we're able to continue operating like that. Extra and intracurricular, we offer a lot, and not everything that's up there that's offered are necessarily salary positions to our staff, but we do offer a lot. Art club, international club, yearbook, FBLA, FFA, NHS, the sports, forensics, which is now called something different, but it's speech and dramatic arts, I believe is what it's called now. Those are all things that allow a student, if they're an athlete, great, you have an opportunity to go out and compete athletically. If you're into the fine arts, as far as band and choir, we still have those opportunities for those students. If you're business oriented, our FBLA program is growing. It is awesome. She does a phenomenal job. Cross country was new to us also within the last 10 years, and that opportunity for those kids is great. So just very proud of what we're able to offer our students. It gives all of our students an opportunity to find a spot to fit extra or intracurricularly if maybe they're not into the traditional, I guess what you might call small school setting where you're either an athlete or you're an FFA. Up here, they have all kinds of different options, and I think that's great. Technology devices, passed a one-on-one initiative. That's been about, I believe, 8 years ago, where we wanted to make sure that every student in our class or in our classes had a technology device that was accessible to them during class, any class. I know that a lot of the curriculums that we're buying right now, a lot of them only have online components, so the students have to have those Chromebooks to take those Chromebooks home to do homework, to do those types of things. Obviously, the elementary doesn't use the technology quite as much, but as they get to middle school and high school, they're using that technology and those resources every single day. And if we didn't have them, it's definitely going to change and create some sort of hurdle in their learning. The Chromebooks that we buy, they're expensive, but still only the life cycle on a Chromebook, and obviously they set it this way, the life cycle on a Chromebook to receive updates from Chrome or Google is only 4 years. After 4 years, all of those updates are gone. The only thing that you have left is a browser. So it's important to make sure the technology we have is capable of keeping up with state testing requirements, ACT testing requirements, and all of those things. So the technology be up to date is important to our teachers, it's important to our staff, our students, and it's kind of, I would say, the way of the future, but it's already here. So the technology is something that needs to stay. Growing student needs. If you know somebody who works at the school, if you've got younger kids, ask them what they see as far as the students. And the students have changed. Some of their needs, some of their emotional needs, anxiety, learning, the needs of these students are growing. I don't know what it's related to, but you can ask teachers that have been tenured for a very long time if they see growing needs of the students. The growing needs are not going away. I believe that every student should have a fair shot and a good opportunity to learn. Obviously our special education program, those costs are going up. And a lot of times we don't have control over how we spend those special education dollars because every student, especially if they qualify for an IEP, they are entitled by law to a free and appropriate education. Some of those students might have to have a one-on-one aid with them that's actually drawn right into their IEP. Whether or not the district likes it or can afford that or not, we have to provide it. So we have to make sacrifices to meet the needs of the students that are growing. And it's not going away. But there's no greater feeling that I see is a student who was this tall, who may have been at an alternative school that we had to obviously pay for, but they could not operate within these brick walls. As they grow up and they get to high school and they get to middle school, they're able to integrate back. And those are some of the resources that we had to provide to get them there, but it's great to see that growth. So the needs of our student population are not going away.
The other item that we talked about in terms of a need for the referendum is to maintain what's called the Facilities, Building, and Maintenance Fund. Okay, this is a separate fund that all school districts can establish. It's many times referred to as Fund 46. Okay, that's how a school district identifies that. There's very strict requirements with regard to that, how it's set up. It's basically set up for school district capital improvement projects, okay, maintenance projects. So what the school district does is incorporates that into its budget, and every year puts dollars into that Fund 46 because it can't be touched for any other purpose. The reason those dollars are there is so that it's like a savings account for larger projects. So that way, the school district, it reduces the need for the school district to come back and have a facilities referendum for that larger project. So it's contributing it to it on an annual basis to try and get enough money in there and take care of future needs, which are part of a capital improvement plan, and those are all laid out. That's a requirement to set this up. And that, if the district cannot afford to contribute to that, right, what's in there now, which is, I believe, close to $300 and some thousand, that can be used for projects.
You can just text number that, Jason.
There we go. So that's why it's advantageous for the district to maintain that fund, because by maintaining that fund, it's eliminating the need to borrow for those projects going forward. Okay, and you know when you borrow, you're paying interest as well. So, yes, this is a good future planning method that ends up saving the district a lot of money when those projects need to be taken care of.
So, obviously, what happens if it doesn't pass? We've kind of alluded to it throughout the presentation, or at least I have when I had the opportunity to talk. If it doesn't pass, we're back into the situation where we were before. We're putting our heads together, trying to figure out a budget that's not going to eat all of our general fund balance and be able to have it somewhat balanced. So you're going to prioritize your operating budget, you're going to look at programming, you're going to look at staffing. You're going to possibly reduce the class offerings that we have, which could possibly go all the way down to the elementary school and all the way up to the high school, depending upon if we're looking at specialist rotations or if we're looking at career and technical education. Those are just examples of things that we're all going to have to look at. We are going to have to consider larger classes because the likelihood is that we'll probably have less staff. We're going to have to look at all of the extra and intracurricular offerings to figure out how we're saving money there. We can keep or we can defer technology purchases and maintenance needs. That's definitely something that we've done this year with the technology. We have deferred those technology needs. And if we want to continue to be able to operate in a somewhat close capacity as we are, or how we were last year, we're going to have to go back to another referendum in April of 2025 if the board decides that's something they want to do. But that's an option. All of those are options. None of those are guarantees. But those are all options and things that are going to have to be considered. This tell me, Carol.
This is you.
This is me.
It's a continuation.
Talked about it in retaining staff, finding staff. This year, none of the staff took any kind of raise unless they did it based upon credits, and that goes anywhere from a custodial member to a teacher to an administrator. Nobody's seen any more money this year than they did last year. And that's going to be real tough to do, especially in the land of almost free agency when it comes to teachers, that they don't have to follow any pay structure anymore, where our high school math teacher could say, you know what, I want to go to Fenimore and make $15,000 more. It happens. So far we've been pretty decent, but I also know what our job applicants look like when we're trying to bring teachers in. There's a shortage of educators. If we get educators, even if we need to coach them up, it's better to have them than not, because there's a lot of districts right now that are still looking for teachers for this school year. We can't contribute to the building and maintenance fund. Carol talked about that. I don't like going to referendums at all. I do know that I would really be in a hard spot up here trying to sell a facility referendum for sure. And if you have a strong Fund 46, the likelihood of having to go to a building referendum is a heck of a lot less. Can't make any guarantees, but the likelihood of going to referendum for facilities, if you have a healthy maintenance fund, is less. Talked to the general fund balance a little bit earlier. Biannual budget, we don't know what it's going to look like. If the $1.1 million referendum passes, maybe by the time we get to the fourth year or have to go back to ask more questions, that wouldn't be enough. So having that healthy fund balance gives us a little cushion to avoid, like I said, extraordinarily difficult decisions, even more difficult than what we're talking about now.
All right, now we're going to go back to talking about the tax impact of just the 2024 referendum, okay? And because it is a 3-year referendum, it would start, you would see that impact on the December 24 tax bill, and December 25, December 26. Those are the 3 tax bills that it impacts, and then it stops. Okay? The only way it can continue on is if you go through another referendum. We produce what's called a tax rate in a per thousand calculation so that you can apply it to that equalized or fair market property value, not assessed value, that is on your tax bills, and we'll go through that exercise as well. The next thing is the school district receives state aid. Okay, we talked about that state aid formula. But the state aid is 1 year behind. So whatever expenses the district had last year, last budget year, went into the aid formula and produced a number for this budget year. That's how we got the number on October 15th that said, okay, this is how much aid you're going to get. It was based off of last year. So the first year of the referendum does not have any state aid, what we call a state aid offset. That means the state's not contributing to that referendum in the first year. But the second year, it's going to get about 30% of that number, 30% of 1.1 million, should be coming from the state. And the other 70% would be coming from taxpayers. Okay? So that would start in the second year. So it would go the second year, third year, fourth year. Even though this referendum only goes out 3 years, it lags a year, right? So the first year there is no aid, but in the fourth year when there's no referendum, you're going to get the aid because it's always a year behind. So that means you're going to have 2 different tax impacts. You're going to have one that we talked about in this tax bill, which is at $2.60 per thousand. The following year, you're not going to be, you're going to have the state sharing in it with you, so that tax rate's going to go down. Okay, so we'll go through that exercise on the next page. So, here's, again, we're using 100,000 as easy math. Not to imply there's any properties nowadays that aren't going to fall under that, but it's just easy math as an example. So here's part of a tax bill. There's up in the corner, right? And you're going to see at the top, you're going to see assessed value land, assessed value improvements, and then total assessed value. Right below that, same thing, but it's going to say estimated fair market land, estimated fair market improvements, and then the estimated fair market total. Okay? If you have use value assessment, it's not going to have 2 sets of numbers. It's all going to be on one line. But for now, let's go with the fact that you're not going to use the assessed value. You're going to use the estimated fair market. That is equalized. Don't ask me why Department of Revenue gives it 2 names, but it does. So if you take now, when you get your December tax bill, right, you'd be looking for that property value. So we're pretending here that that number is 100,000. So that's the example. we place a decimal point before the last three digits. And we're doing that because the tax rate we're using is stated per thousand. So if you have 100,000, it really becomes 100. You multiply that answer, 100, by that tax rate, which right now is $2.60. So if you do that math, you get $260. Okay? But when you get to your December of 25 tax bill, you're going to do that same exercise, and let's just assume that it's still that 100,000, right? The tax rate, instead of being $2.60, is going to be $1.80, because now you're going to have that 30% aid coming in to share in the cost, and the balance is going to be tax levy. So that's where it goes down to $1.80, and that $1.80 times 100 gives you $180. Okay, so it's a two-step process, totally driven by the way school districts receive their aid. Okay, so that's the two numbers that you're going to be seeing, and how it's how you use that box, that information that's in that box. Stated as a per thousand, just chop it off after the first three digits and multiply the rate. Okay, so that's one example. So now we're going to get a little more specific. This is the exercise that you can do with your own tax bill. And I'm going back to your December of 23 tax bill because that's the only one you have in your hands right now. So again, your December 23 tax bill, look at the top, use total estimated fair market value or the use value assessment number. Place a decimal point before those last three digits, multiply that answer times $7.53. That was the tax rate for last year. That was in your December 23 tax bill. Do that math, and then there's going to be one more step. You're going to subtract what's called the school tax reduced by, you're going to subtract the school levy credit. That's another box on your tax bill. And it's right at the top in the corner, and we'll show you that. When you do this math and you get the answer, subtract the number that's in that box. And yet that is going to be the dollar amount of school taxes. That's another reason why it's very difficult to say this is exactly what your tax bill is going to be. Because this school levy credit changes every year. We don't know what that number is going to be. That comes out of the Department of Revenue. That goes to your municipal clerks with the instructions of what amount goes in those boxes. I know there was a formula behind that, but I also know that the state legislature can tweak that number from year to year. So that's why I can't even give you a guess as to what that's going to be like. But there will be something on your December 24 tax bill that will reduce your school taxes. I just don't know what it is. So, if we look at the next slide, here's a tax bill. This is what I was talking about. Okay, we already seen that little top portion on that other slide. But again, the difference between your two values is shown. You want to work with that estimated fair market value, and you'll see when you look at your tax bill, you're going to go, oh yeah, there's a difference between those two numbers. If you do this exercise with the assessed value, you're not going to get the right number. So you have to use that number. And then there are multiple taxing jurisdictions on your tax bill, right? You're going to pay taxes for your village or town. You're going to pay some of the counties. You're going to pay some of the school districts, and you're going to pay some of the vocational district. Every one of them is going to have taxes on there. So obviously the one that we're focused on is the school district here. So if you take your December tax bill, take that fair market value, chop off the last three digits, right? So it's a per thousand, multiply it times $7.53, and there's the box where it has school taxes reduced by school levy tax credit. There's the box right there. Subtract that number from your answer. know exactly what the taxes are for the school district. Okay? So you can do that as your own exercise right now. I can't tell you what your December 24 tax bill is like because I don't think that information has even been released yet to the municipal clerks.
No, it hasn't.
Yeah, see, that comes in November, so,
By the end of it.
by the end of November. Yeah. Okay, so again, we're talking about school finance, right? Now people are saying, you know, they'd like more definitive answers, and yeah, right, this is how it works. So, not very good answers, but that is exactly how it works. Okay?
So, back here, real quick, when and where to vote. On November 5th, all polling places open at 7 a.m. and they close at 8 p.m. All questions concerning your polling place should be directed to your municipal clerk in your village or town. You can register to vote by following the hyperlink at the bottom, the myvote.wi.gov. Those of you that are into QR codes, if you take a picture of that bottom right with a smartphone or a cell phone, what that would do is it would direct you to the River Ridge website, which I just want to spend a little bit of time going over. If people go to the website, they'll come to this, which is our home screen. You scroll down right here, this pencil 2024 operational referendum. You click on that and you go to the referendum webpage. A couple different things that are on there is this video. It's kind of neat. Talks about kids. Kids talk about what they like about our district. But some of the things that we really didn't talk a lot about were there's just some graphs out there that have been done locally underneath the school finance information. This one here, if you click on it, it's hard to read up there on the graph. Go to the website. What it's highlighting is really the, I guess, no increases in public education and how that relates to ESSER funding. It's a pretty good snapshot of where we have been the last 10 years. The director of CISA put that together, so that's kind of his information. He would be happy to explain it to absolutely anybody, but it kind of explains how inflation, ESSER funds, and increases all go together. Another snapshot that's on there was a piece that was produced by WASBO, which is the Wisconsin Association of School Board Officials. They came up with this, and it says that post-Act 10, when the school funding formula did not allow for any inflationary increases, if it had, we would have seen an increase of approximately $3,380 per pupil. And what that would mean for the River Ridge School District is we wouldn't be sitting here asking for obviously probably any referendum dollars. The last thing on there is this sheet here. It's kind of difficult to see, but if I make it bigger, what this is all of the school districts in our CISA 3, which are all in southwest Wisconsin. And it will show you the last year they passed an operating referendum, whether it's operating or whether it's a recurring or non-recurring. This has nothing to do with facility referendums. And it kind of just shows you how much they have, as communities, decided that they were willing to go above the revenue limit. Biggest one, River Valley, right now is 5.5, Bosqueville 1.8, Platteville 1.5, also going back to referendum this fall. Prairie du Chine's going back this fall. As of right now, River Ridge on that list still has that $350,000 that it's carrying with us in a recurring referendum. We are one of the 4 bottom schools there at $350,000. Obviously, that same chart shows us that we're going to referendum, but every district's needs might be a little bit different, but to me, what this chart shows you is every district has needs. Just go to the website, they're all there. This CISA 3 document, all that information was gathered off of the DBI website. The WASCO document, that's a document that WASCO has that is public, and the snapshot of the last 10 years. The CISA director would be glad to explain that to anybody. But a lot of information on there, and this presentation tonight will also be shared to the website. It will be posted for people to take a look at. So with that, Carol, if you want to